Hey guys, this is Benny for NewMediaRockstars.com. Today I am here with the man, the myth, the legend, Tim Ferriss, successful internet entrepreneur and New York Times best-selling author as well. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, my first question is, let me get this straight. You're a successful internet entrepreneur, you're a New York Times bestselling author, a Guinness World Record holder, a Chinese boxing national champion, and you speak like, what, 6 languages, right?
5 on a really good day. Yeah, depends on the day. 4 or 5.
What are you compensating for? Oh my God.
Yeah, well, there's a lot I'm compensating for. But what I think a lot of people miss is that, I'm very good at writing a bio for myself, number one. But number two is that most of those things, the vast majority of things on that entire list have only happened in the last like 5 years or so. So it's really been a matter of getting the right recipe for me for approaching learning skills to make that as fast as possible. So that's sort of the gist of my latest obsession. But yeah, it's because I have a method for approaching these things. It's not because I have any special skill. Like for instance, not to jump right into it, but for instance, like the language stuff, right? So people view me as good at languages, but the reality is what people miss is that in junior high and so forth, when I studied Spanish for 3 years, I completely failed. I couldn't string sentences together, couldn't have a conversation with anyone, and concluded that I was bad at languages. But yeah, I had the wrong method. And it wasn't until I went to Japan as an exchange student for a year, my first real trip out of the U.S., if you can believe that.
Right.
And I lived with a host family. I had to learn Japanese through comic books and judo textbooks because I didn't have any classes. I had to go to regular Japanese, like physics, history classes in Japanese with students in a 5,000-person Japanese school. And it was from that point that I kind of started refining the approaches to language acquisition and whatnot. So anyway, yeah, it's a good bio. I'm compensating for a lot, but there is a method to the madness.
That's awesome, though. I mean, like, you seem to be a person that loves, like, learning, constantly learning new things, and you have your own little approach for it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious, and I like to make other people curious.
Oh, that's great. So out of all these achievements, like, which one are you like most proud of? And yeah.
Man, well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind, I would probably have a more lofty, highbrow response if I thought about it longer. But the first one that came to mind, which is maybe the strangest, was Japanese horseback archery, which I did it was for a pilot for History Channel, and it was broadcast. And I had a week to land in Nikko, Japan, and learn to ride a horse at full gallop with no hands, pulling arrows off my back, shooting targets the size of dinner plates. And that was really not only challenging, but really, really dangerous. And it was all captured on film. I mean, you can actually find it online if you search Tim Ferriss Yabusame, Y-A-B-U-S-A-M-E, or Trial by Fire, which was the name of the show. That was really unique for me because I had not only the compressed time, not only the physical danger, but I had a crew of 20 people filming it and following me around, and it added this additional pressure and weird performance anxiety that I hadn't really had much of before. So it was really challenging, but ultimately I actually had a record of it, which was cool. Because most of the stuff I do, like, there's no video, there's no anything. So it's fun to actually have a video diary of that, basically.
That's awesome. That's really random, but it's awesome.
It's a good time.
Yeah. Well, what's the next thing you plan to dominate then? I mean, like, you gotta have. I'm sure you have like a laundry list of things.
Yeah, I have a long list. I mean, I will probably make another appearance on television. I had some interesting stuff come over the transom, and I still have a couple of good years left of doing crazy physical things. So I'd like to get that out of my system while I can. But in the short term, surfing, Bahasa Indonesian. I'd really like to learn Indonesian. It's a cool language. It's highly, highly regular, so you can learn it really quickly. And what else? Marksmanship. I was actually just in your neck of the woods last weekend. I was in Los Angeles studying sniping with some guys from the LA SWAT team.
Wow.
Which was fascinating. And what's funny about looking at all these skills, it's not funny, what's fascinating about looking at all these skills that seem completely unrelated is that the way you become really good at any of them is exactly the same. I mean, there is a blueprint that you can kind of impose on all these things. Whether it's swimming, I couldn't swim until a few years ago. And I grew up on Long Island, which is really embarrassing, like right on the water, and I couldn't swim. Or shooting basketball. I mean, I quit basketball as soon as my junior high coach was like, "You dribble like a caveman. You should go back to wrestling." And I was so humiliated. And I have no vert, which is true. But I assumed that I would just never be able to play any basketball at all until really about a year ago. You know, and I was writing The 4 Hour Chef, and we can get into that. But I wanted to tackle all the skills that I had given up on and see if I could make them work. And so I went after basketball, and like literally, I'm not kidding, with the right coach and a really contrarian way, like I was hit my first 3-pointers in a weekend. I mean, it was nuts. And the fun of it is the detective work, you know, like really deconstructing things and trying to figure out where the shortcuts are in a positive way, or where the Archimedes levers are, where you can do some pretty cool stuff. Like with swimming, the reason I made a quantum leap and went from literally, and this is because of the method. There's a guy named Terry Laughlin created a method called total immersion, and it basically removes kicking. So like all the exhaustion, it removes all of those failure points. So I went from 2-lap maximum, like doggy paddle, drowning monkey style, to 20 laps for relaxation, like super easily. Now I can go to the gym and swim for an hour to relax. It's like meditation, which is nuts because I was always terrified of drowning.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
I mean, like you, I'm actually a dyslexic too, and that actually transcended like through my high school years and everything. And I wasn't an athlete too back then, but so I actually ended up quitting a lot of things that before I started them just simply because I thought I couldn't do it or people told me I couldn't do it. But then
yeah.
it wasn't until like nowadays, now that I have like certain achievements. I was an athlete too. I was a national badminton player for a little bit, and
Very
then
nice.
when that happened, I started being exposed to different types of athletes, and I learned like so many different things. And now, since what I learned in badminton, it actually transcended through all the other sports that I kind of like took part in like in the past, but didn't didn't participate anymore. And then I found that hey, like a lot of these skills kind of like transfer over, and then I was actually really decent at it
Yeah,
after a while.
that's the
So
fun part. So the transfer is what's really fun. So
yeah.
for instance, I mean, I'm a lifelong non-cook. I've always hated to cook. I've always found it really inconvenient and time-consuming. It's just like, that's why I work, so I have money so I don't have to cook. You know, like that was sort of my attitude. And what I realized is, well, number one, I thought it might be fun, kind of like Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, to
Yeah.
take a skill that had actually kicked my ass a few times. Because people only see on the bio, they see the stuff that I pulled off successfully, right? It doesn't list all the failures.
Mhm.
So cooking really had kicked my ass a few times, and I thought, well, my readers have been asking me for a book on accelerated learning for a long time, and I've studied it for 10, 15 years, starting with smart drugs in college and all sorts of craziness. So I decided to take cooking because it had beaten me so many times, number one, uh, and use that as the storytelling and the adventures for teaching all these principles about learning languages in 8 to 12 weeks, or the basketball, the swimming, the sharpshooting, whatever, right? And what you find is that just like you trained in badminton and found all these principles that transcended to other things, the kitchen, in a weird way, is like the ultimate dojo for self actualization, because you have 5 senses to play with. It incorporates all the senses. So when you learn certain principles that apply in the kitchen, and I mean, you can spend 5 to 10 minutes twice a week. It doesn't take a lot of time. It transcends to everything else, which was really, really cool. And one of the things that really surprised me was how even if you practice cooking for a week with a good logical progression, which I have, which is hard to find, but if you do that, even if you never cook again, you go from tasting food in black and white, like hot, cold, good, bad, to like HD with a million colors, which is pretty sweet. Where you start collecting flavors like baseball cards, and then you're able to just experience food in a totally different way. And you're going to do that anyway. I mean, you're going to eat. You might not cook, but you're certainly going to eat.
Right. That's awesome. I mean, yeah, I think we're going to touch more on that later, but I wanted to move on to kind of like your most successful book to date as of now, which is obviously the 4 Hour Work Week. And in this book, you kind of teach the concept of letting go the old formula of like working a life of like 9 to 5 jobs and then retiring like at your old age. To experiencing the freedom of traveling while still gaining a monthly income of like up to 5 figures, and it will take zero management. So what do you say to skeptics and people who don't think that this is possible?
Well, fortunately, the book came out in 2007, so So the skeptics, I'm like,
Yeah.
search, 4HWW success story on YouTube and watch a couple hundred people tell you why, exactly how they've already done it. I'm
Right.
like, so that's great. I mean, fortunately, I have a very engaged audience, and whether it's through the blog or otherwise, I mean, there are hundreds of people who have put up case studies and tracked and recorded exactly how they did what you just described. So it's easier now to the naysayers to just say, just basically say, do your goddamn due diligence, or like, we're not going to have a discussion about it, because there's nothing inherently preventing it. And I think that whether you look at, let's say, the 4-Hour Work Week, which came out in 2007, what a lot of people don't realize is the 4-hour body is actually selling, or has for a long time was selling at 5 times the rate of the 4-hour work week.
Wow.
So it's actually it's on track to be more successful in the 4-hour work week, which is kind of wild. But if you look at all the books, what I do, there are primarily 2 things that I do. Number 1 is I look for anomalies, right? I look for people who are uncommon or ridiculously good at something and become good at it in a short period of time. And then I try to dissect that and replicate those results. And sometimes you find crazy people or freaks of nature. And other times you find, like the mother of 2 who can travel 6 months out of the year with her kids and make really incredible income with a side business. And that is a recipe that you can replicate. And that's also true with the body, right? You find, let's say, a coach. There's a guy, again, down in your neck of the woods named Barry Ross, who trains high school and collegiate track athletes. And his runners break world records. And if you meet one of his female runners, for instance, like a sophomore in high school, 130 pounds, she can deadlift 450 pounds for repetitions. Wow. No wraps, no belt, no nothing. And she looks like the average high school chick. There's nothing unusual about her. And when I then tried to apply his method, because I was like, well, I'm not an elite runner, and you can even see the result, like the excuses start to bubble up. But I was like, all right, let me put that aside. I'll try it. And I went from a max deadlift of 315 because my hands were really weak to very comfortably, without any wraps, pulling from my knees, no belt, with chalk, 650 pounds for 5 repetitions, which is recorded in when Morgan Spurlock's team came down and did a day in the life with Tim Ferriss. Mm-hmm. It's all, you can see it. And it's I can do that comfortably from training. Check this out. Less than 5 minutes of total muscle tension for the entire week. It's it's incredibly minimalist. It's hard to believe until you see it. Right. And I don't blame the skeptics, but I have too many case studies to point to, so I don't take them too seriously.
Yeah, you got the results already, so it's really hard to argue against solid proof.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's cool. If I can do 100 videos, would that satisfy you? 200, 1,000? Yeah. The answer's no, and you just want to pick a fight. You're not a reasonable person. So
right.
You can't, and I think this is the general good policy in life, is that you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Mm. So pick your battles wisely.
I 100% agree. All right, cool. What would you say are the characteristics that a person needs in order to apply the 4-hour work week model to its fullest potential?
I think the characteristics are their characteristics and their habits. So in both cases, you could say they need to view themselves as an experimentalist, scientist. They need to run experiments and 2-week trials a lot of the time, whether it's the low information diet or applying the 80-20 rule, looking at the 20% of, let's say, products and services that produce 80% of their income, or the 20% of activities in a job that produce 80% or more of how they are measured at, let's say, quarterly or annual reviews for raises, etc. Viewing those exercises as 1 or 2 week trials and viewing those as experiments is very important. I'd say, secondly, would be fear setting well, and the fear setting is the same as goal setting, but you're identifying the worst case scenarios of whatever decisions you're considering making that you've been postponing. And it's a very simple exercise. So you write down the things you're considering doing on, let's say, left-hand side of a piece of paper. Then you write down another column, the worst things that could happen, in detail, get detailed, because fearing failure or a bad outcome is how people postpone action. It's too vague. So just like goals, you can't overcome your fears unless they're clear. So get really specific about the worst case scenarios, exactly how much money you could lose, exactly which relationships you could destroy, etc. Mm-hmm. Next column, the things you could do to minimize the likelihood of those things happening. And then very last column, the things you could do to get back to where you are if those bad things happen. And it gives you tremendous power then to move forward with certain types of decisions, like quitting your job, getting a new job, taking 6 months off, taking, let's say, for an entrepreneur, you know how this is. I mean, taking a month or two away from your business. That's terrifying. And how do you put systems in place? How do you create autonomous decision making? You know, empowering employees or contracted employees to do things in your place, even if they can only do it 50% as well. And I think the last characteristic would be more of a philosophical operating system, which is you have to get comfortable letting the small bad things happen if you want to get the big good things done. And if you want to have a very high output business and a very high enjoyment life and have control of your time, you need to get good at accepting the small bad things and letting those things happen actively. Because the only other option is micromanaging every aspect of your life. And that's self-defeating.
I like that. I like that a lot. Moving on to kind of like the way you marketed your first book, right? You noted in your past interviews that one of the reasons why, your first book was successful is that you took the bottom-up approach in terms of, as opposed to the, old top-down approach. And so kind of for the sake of our readers, kind of explain like what the bottom-up approach is, because for me personally, I feel that, it's super important for anyone that's trying to make a living online, whether as an artist or a businessman.
Yes, the bottom-up approach meant looking very closely at how marketing was evolving and how sales was evolving. So, for instance, when I began to write the 4 Hour Workweek, I sought out people who had been on the bestseller list, say 2 or 3 years ago. And you have records of all the New York Times bestseller lists, so you can find this. And I interviewed them. I interviewed about 12 best writing authors who'd won a lot of awards, Booker Prizes, Pulitzer Prizes, etc., on how to write a good book. Then I also interviewed 12 best-selling authors, not always the same thing, about the areas that were most productive, so least input for the most output, and then also the biggest waste of time. And there was a consensus. The consensus was radio sells books, good radio sells books like NPR. Television's decreasing in importance, but if you can get a long segment on a good television show, it will absolutely move the needle. And then blogs are absolutely exploding like a rocket ship in importance, and that book tours are a waste of time. So those were a few patterns in the data, and so I began to. I remember this actually really clearly. It was December 26th. Let me think about this. December 26th. 2006, where I had gathered all this data. I was like, well, I guess it's time for me to figure out what a blog is. And I didn't know anything about it. And I sat down, so I started Googling 100 most influential blogs. I didn't even think technology existed at that point.
Yeah,
maybe so. And what I decided a few things. I'll try to keep this somewhat short, but the best way to reach bloggers is not via email. So email is the most crowded channel. That's how they most get hit. There's the most noise, and it's hard to stick out as a signal. Phone is both inconveniencing and still a crowded channel. So what I decided to do was, rather than spend dozens or hundreds of hours trying to chase down people through those two media, I went to trade shows and went to a handful of trade shows like South by Southwest, which was much later, of course, and went to Blog World Expo, or whichever events I could get a hold of, and I would spend time in the hallways, and I would spend time at the bars. That's pretty much it. But what I also did is I would go up to moderators on panels, and I would explain to them what I was up to. Very soft pitch, very soft. I'd just be like, I'm writing my first book. I don't know anything about this. I'm eager to learn. I'm a good student. I'm very coachable. Here's a little bit of my background for credentials, just so they don't think you're some kook. Is there anyone here you think I would enjoy talking to? And they'd be like, yeah, go talk to that guy. So I'd go over and talk to that guy, and I'd say, oh, so-and-so said we might get along. Just figured I'd introduce myself because it's my first time here. I don't know anybody. And I would ask them a lot of questions. And I did this at bars, too. I'd see a group of say bloggers or whatever, and I'd walk up and I'd say, "Do you mind if I eavesdrop? This is my first time at this event. I don't know anybody." They'd be like, "That's kind of weird. Whatever, sure." And so I'd ask questions, like if they said blah 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 Ruby on Rails and I didn't know what that was, I'd be like, "I'm really sorry, I'm in the deep end of the ignorance pool here. Like, what is Ruby on Rails?" And I would ask questions about what they're up to and so forth. And eventually, whether it was one person or a group of people, they'd be like, "So what do you do exactly?" And I'd be like, "Well, I run this business, but I'm finishing up my first book and da 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 da." And then I'd stop and I'd wait to see who asked, "Well, what's it about?" And if they asked me, then I would give them the answer. And at the end of those conversations, I never said, "Can we do an article on your blog?" or "Can we do a blah blah blah?" I never pitched. I said, "If you like, I don't think you'd like the whole book. It's books are long and they take a lot of time, but there are 2 chapters that I think you would really like." If it was true. And I'd say, if you'd like, I have a bunch of advanced copies. I don't know who to send them to. And I'd be happy to just send you one and put a sticky note on the 20 pages I think you'd like. Don't expect you to write about it, nothing. Just I'd be happy to send it to you. And they were like, "Sure." 5 times out of 10, they were pretty cool with it. And that's how the tidal wave started, man. It was super soft pitch and refined marketing. So the way I define marketing is knowing exactly who your market is, product market fit. So I never sent a book to anyone for whom it didn't make perfect sense for those 20 pages that I sent them. I was laser focused and surgical. And so it was a no-brainer for many of them that they would give it to their audiences because it was good content, custom targeted to their readers or listeners. So that's how it happened. And then I went to South by Southwest. My book came out in April, and I went to South by Southwest just prior to that, and I gave a presentation, my first ever real presentation at a big event like that. And I rehearsed at my friend's house down the street, actually, by talking to his 3 chihuahuas. 3 chihuahuas. And they did obviously don't care about content, right? But like, if you weren't engaging, they all sat down. And if you weren't engaging as a presenter, they'd just like turn around and start like scratching their ear or something. So I was measuring my success by if I could get chihuahuas to sit, like, just enraptured staring at me. I don't think I've ever told that story before. And then I went in and I killed it. I prepared really, really hard. I did that presentation probably 100 times before I gave it. And at the same South by Southwest, Twitter had launched. It was the launch of Twitter, or at least the first public launch. And that was the tipping point, man. Like, everything changed from that point on. And that's how it happened.
That's amazing. I think that really transcends to, like I told you before, a lot of our readers are, aspiring like YouTube creators and everything. I think that and one of the biggest questions that they ask me is, how do they go out about to collaborate with, other YouTubers and, to create content and thereby helping, promote their channel. And some of the advice that I always give is like, attend meetups, attend, trade shows, events like a VidCon that focus on your type of niche, and then just go out and talk to people, and then
Absolutely. Yeah, and don't be pushy. It doesn't work. If it's a fit and you're a clear communicator and you're very calm and not pushy, if it's a great fit, they'll say yes. If it's not a great fit because you've been too lazy to do your homework, then the harder your pitch is, the more they're going to hate you. So do your homework. Know thy audience. It's that simple, honestly. I mean, and yes, you have to be persistent in some cases, but there's a fine line between being persistent and a huge pain in the ass. And I think that there's a misconception that to hustle means to be pushy, and that's not true. To hustle is to be like a special ops intelligence officer, where you plan everything down to the minute detail. If this, then X. If this, then Y. And you have a very concrete, well thought out plan. That is proper hustle. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts in terms of resources that I would recommend people read if they really want to get, I think, a refined and practical grasp of marketing with timeless principles that don't expire. I would say the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Rees, R-I-E-S, and Trout. So the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. Not for the internet. Get the older one. They did one for like the internet information superhighway, which is not good. Get the old one, where they give examples of like imported beers and airlines and stuff. And then I would say second and third, 2 articles that you can get online. 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly, who's founding editor of Wired. And then I believe it's called The Truth About Social Media, which is a very boring title, but it's written by Tim O'Reilly. So Tim O apostrophe Riley, who runs O'Reilly Media. And he is a real thought leader and has an impeccable prediction rate, success rate with prediction over the last 10, 20 years in technology. But both, you read those three things, you could do all three in one day, this weekend, next weekend, whatever. You'll be ahead of 99% of marketers. So, for sure.
Great. Awesome. I'll definitely link those in the article. Cool. Okay, well, kind of moving on to that, you kind of answered it, but what do you think are the biggest factors in achieving success on the internet?
Being different. I think that you can try to be the best in a crowded niche all day long, but that's a very hard battle. And I think that being different and niching down so you know, I'll give you a teaser, who your 1,000 true fans are. So if you can satisfy the wants or needs of 1,000 people who belong to a very specific demographic and make those people die-hard fans who will support you through thick and thin, you never have to buy another ad. You never have to do any more marketing for the rest of your life. And that sounds like an overstatement. It's not, I can tell you. I mean, I have a blog that gets about 1.2 million uniques a month right now. I post every 2, 3, 4 weeks. Doesn't make much of a difference. And my audience sticks with me because I don't want to put out a lot of content that people merely like. I want to put out content, maybe if it's once a week, great. If it's once a month, great. If it's once a year, fine. I only want to put out content that people love. And it takes a lot of focus to do that. It's a lot easier to keep the wheels spinning. So I would say that being different, and then I really carefully choosing, those 1,000 people. And that doesn't mean you go out and find them on the internet necessarily. It means that you create a product with those 1,000 people in mind. So when I wrote the 4-Hour Workweek, I mean, I didn't have a blog. I didn't have anything. I wrote that book. The only way I got that book out, because I tried to write, I find writing hard. I really do. So when I started to write it, at first it came out, I went to Princeton undergrad, and I go back and teach in high-tech entrepreneurship twice a year usually. But at first I wrote, and it was this really like pompous Princeton speak. It was just this like, oh my God, it was terrible. So I wrote a couple of chapters, I threw it all out. And I was like, no, I need to be more casual. So then I tried that, and it was like this stupid Three Stooges slapstick. It was just horrible on the opposite end. So I had to throw that out. And then what I decided finally was, I'm going to write this like a letter to my 2 or 3 closest friends who have all the same problems. The ones that after 2 or 3 years of experimenting, I figured out. So I would have 2 glasses of wine, and then I would start writing as if I were writing to my best friends. And that's the only way I got the book out. So anyway, maybe a bit of a digression, but that was knowing my audience. I had 2 exact people in mind. It so happens that you take like the archetype, like one of them was a guy who got seduced by investment banking, went into iBanking, was working 80 to 100-hour weeks, making crazy money, finally bought his favorite car. He bought a Porsche. And, I asked him a few weeks after he bought it, like, how's it going? 'Cause he was so excited when he called me about it. And he's like, how is the Porsche? I don't know. It's in my garage. There's dust on it. I haven't used it. And I was just like, wow. And like, that's an archetype. There are thousands of people who are in that exact same situation. So writing for this person, even though I was writing for one person, is actually hitting 1,000 true fans in that demographic. And that's very clearly defined. Like 20 to 27-year-old investment banker right out of school. You could also make it McKinsey or whatever. And like, I know those people I very intimately. So anyway, I don't want to drag on and on, but I think being different and knowing who your top 1,000 targets are.
No, I think that's a really important point, like knowing your audience. I think that's the key thing that if anybody should take in is probably that. I think that's really important. So moving on. So I read somewhere that you believe that technology today, such as email instant messaging and internet-enabled PDAs, complicate life rather than simplify. Can you kind of touch more on this? And does this list include like social media outlets today? Since now it's heavily prevalent in this day and age.
Yeah, So that was a debate that I moderated for who was it? The Economist. It was a debate that I moderated for The Economist. We had I think it was John Maeda of RISD, president of RISD, and some other gentleman. In any case, I think that in a digital world, there's always more information and always more demand for your attention than you can possibly contend with. So uh, it's important to focus on output. You have to limit input. That's the way I look at it. So as instant people begin to expect instant access, and they send you a text, and if you don't reply back in 5 minutes, then they're like, "What's wrong? What's going on?" You know, whatever. It's important to be able to reestablish barriers, and you can use tech tools to help do that, even for self behaviors. So, for instance, you can use tools like rescue time to block certain sites for certain hours, so you can't access them on your computer, which can be very valuable, like Facebook, Twitter. And I mean, full disclosure, I mean, I'm an investor, early investor in Facebook and Twitter. So my sort of side life is advising and investing in startups. So it's like between 25 and 30 companies since 2007. So that would include, Uber, StumbleUpon, Evernote, Shopify. It's a good list. I've been very fortunate to work with some excellent companies. But they'll all say the same thing. I mean, to get a lot done, you need to ignore the vast majority of things that come at you. Mm. You can develop that through discipline. You can develop that through a philosophical sort of operating system like Stoicism. So I'm a huge fan of Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. It's probably my closest thing to a Bible that I have. And but you can also use systems. So another system example would be Email Game. So emailga.me, which allows you to process Gmail in about 50% of the time that it would usually take, because you never see the inbox. It's just a sequential start to finish, timed per message clearance of the inbox to inbox 0. And you can schedule emails for later delivery. You can schedule emails for reminders if you don't hear back within several days. It's incredible. It's a very simple tool, but very, very effective. Yeah, and I think that a lot of these principles are not new. I mean, the tools in the toolbox might be new, but I know I'm mentioning a lot of books. Obviously, I don't expect everyone to read them, but The Effective Executive, written by Peter Drucker, is probably the most famous management theorist of the last 100 years. Also, just a very effective guy, you'd hope, of course. But he and, for instance, you probably know Paul Graham of Y Combinator. The highest performers, whether that's in the world of chefs, the world of sports, the world of startups, they all do the same stuff. And for instance, Peter Drucker talks about how the importance of 2 to 3 hour blocks of time is critical for someone who wants to create. Somebody who wants to be a maker instead of a manager. And that no collection of, let's say, 20-minute breaks, no collection of 20-minute breaks will ever equal 1 3-hour block of time. Just like no collection of 1-week vacations will ever have the impact of 1 2-month vacation. They're just fundamentally different. And Paul Graham has an excellent essay, which you can read online. It's something along the lines of the maker versus the manager schedule. And it talks about this. But self-discipline, operating system, so stoicism for me, and then systems. I think those are 3 keys.
Nice. That kind of outlines your 20-80 rule, correct? I believe.
Yeah, Pareto's law. So that's from the mid to late 1800s was when this law came about. But getting very good at identifying the 20% of activities, the 20% of fill in the blank, anything, that produce 80% of the results that you want, or more. And you find that with investing, you find that with content creation, certainly. I mean, you look at my YouTube channel, it's like I have one video of how to peel eggs without peeling them, where you like blow an egg out of the shell, which is pretty cool. And that has 4 million some odd views. And of course, that's like, I don't know what the percentage is of my total views, but it's well over 90%. And I think that you see that in most places. There are a few things that provide very disproportionate returns. And that's true with services, it's true with products, it's true with customers. So I built and sold a sports nutrition company. At one point, we had 120 different wholesale customers around the world. And it was a headache to manage. I mean, it was like 50, 60 hours a week just to manage those customers. And when I did an 80-20 analysis of the profit per customer, we found that something like 5 of the customers were delivering 90% of the revenue. And but we were the highest maintenance customers were the people in the other 95, or the other 115. So we were spending all our time on the people who gave us the least return on investment. So we changed our systems, basically said, look, if you want to place an order, here's an automated system for doing so. And then we focused on profiling and replicating those most profitable customers and getting those most profitable customers to buy even larger orders more frequently. And boom, it was like profits increased 30, 40% in a few weeks, and the amount of time that required to management went from like 60 hours a week to 2 hours a week. And it was literally just from sitting down with an Excel spreadsheet, pad of paper, and figuring it out for like an afternoon. And it's important to take, and if you're unable to take 2 to 3 hours to do that, you're going to be caught in the hamster wheel forever. So scheduling those breaks is really important.
Nice. Cool. Great. We're going to move on to YouTube here. So many big celebrities and businesses are now taking advantage of YouTube and other online video outlets to build their brand. What are your general thoughts of the recent boom of interest in new media entertainment?
Well, I think it's the future. I mean, there's no doubt that, we're definitely moving from a predominantly network broadcast model to, you see the iteration of, let's say, highly diversified cable networks, and then even more highly diversified, certainly, online channels and networks. Television still holds a very special spot in the minds of the global populace, including the U.S. So, for instance, if you take any of the top 10 most subscribed YouTube channels, they might have, let's say, 3+ million subscribers, but the average American is still going to be more impressed if they have a cable show that gets 500,000 viewers a week. And so the way that you leverage these different outlets depends a lot on what your objective is, right? So if your objective is to get sponsored by Nike or someone like that, you might actually get a higher price if you focus on an outlet like cable with a much smaller ultimate audience. The way the machinery works right now, with interactions between whether it's a CAA, a Nike, an ad agency, that is the most efficient model. But that's going to change. That's going to change real fast. And certainly, I'm much more interested in the YouTube channel than I am in the TV show, because if you're looking to actually sell product and track it, which very few companies do properly per outlet, then having one click to buy through a single author blog or a personality-driven YouTube channel is much more interesting to me. Much more interesting to me. Morning America for a minute, 3 minutes, where people need to remember it and then write it down and go to the computer. The conversion's terrible. I'm not interested.
Right.
I'll do it if I'm in New York. Fantastic. It's fun. But from a strict ROI standpoint, obviously everything's moving to digital.
Yeah. You get the beauty of the call to action too when it comes to YouTube and online outlets.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's just a much more flexible, malleable, experimental outlet and medium. In television, there aren't as many experiments being run because they have a model that is very reliable for generating a certain amount of revenue on a quarterly basis, and you have publicly traded companies responsible. Whereas on YouTube, you have thousands, tens of thousands, God knows how many independent creators, all of whom can experiment as much or as little as they want. So of course they're going to be ahead of the curve eventually. And certainly when you see people like Epic Mealtime being signed to The Collective, and the production value for these videos is absolutely as high as television, no question. And that's just going to continue to be the case.
Well, you mentioned that you had a YouTube channel as well. I did some research, and I found you had a YouTube channel for the 4-Hour Body.
Yeah.
And so my question is, how big of an impact does YouTube have right now, currently, when it comes to marketing your books?
Well, the 4-Hour Body channel was established for a few different reasons. I did do a very high cinematic value trailer, which was, it really does look like a movie trailer. So it's not the typical just like, text on screen kind of talking head nonsense. Not nonsense, but it's just not very interesting or sexy. So I created that channel to showcase that video, which I think has close to 1 million views now. and that video was also repurposed for many other uses, whether in broadcast or elsewhere. The other reason it's important to have a YouTube channel for the 4-Hour Body or for the 4-Hour Chef is to prevent squatters from holding your brand hostage. So if you launch a product these days, like having yourproductname.com is not enough. You need every single variation you can possibly think of on every single outlet that you can possibly think of. And to do otherwise is irresponsible, because it will bite you in the ass, I guarantee you.
Good, I like that. All right, I have a couple of
yeah, Google self-defense is really important. Learning Google self-defense is a critical skill for anyone who wants to be have longevity online with business, for sure.
Oh, okay, great, love it. I have a couple of fan questions for you. The first one is from Twitter, and Adam Zhang asks, who's the single most influential person to your success and why?
All right, I can't give just one answer. I mean, my parents obviously, but that's a gimme. It's kind of a gimme. My parents were very good at exposing me to a lot, so that I naturally became interested in learning, because they exposed me to 100 things, and if I really liked something, they would encourage it. But let me give a few other answers. I'll give one other answer. Wrestling coach John Buxton, who produced an incredible team. I mean, this was at a prep high school. I went from public school to private high school after a buddy of mine was stabbed in the leg in private high school. And John Buxton was an amazing coach. He not only took kids with very poor raw materials and turned them into incredibly good wrestlers. I mean, I did not start with much, and I was a All-American by the end of high school, thanks to him. But he also was multifaceted. He raised the endowment of St. Paul's from, I'm just guessing, somewhere around 50 million to 500 million in the same period of time. He was also an English teacher. And when you look at the people who came out of that team, like Charles Best, who's CEO of a nonprofit called Donors Choose, which I advise, and they were the first nonprofit ever to Fast Company's 50 most creative companies in the world, or innovative companies in the world. You look at every single person on that team, and you ask them the same question you just asked me, and they all say John Buxton. That on Oprah not too long ago. And yeah, the man had a tremendous impact. And it's yeah, that's a simple answer. I mean, he really taught us to believe in ourselves, and he absolutely beat the living hell out of us with, so that whatever we do now, it's like, yeah, well, it wasn't as bad as 10-9-8s with Mr. Buxton. No way, it wasn't close to as hard. So it makes everything else look kind of easy in comparison, which is great. It's a good lesson.
That's awesome. Great story. The second fan question is also from Twitter, and it's about dating. And she asks, is there a way that you can fit dating into 4 hours a week and still find that special someone?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I did an experiment where I outsourced my dating for a while. I hired, I actually put basically a proposal, a request for proposal on Elance, I guess it was, and assembled teams from around the planet, like Philippines, India, Mexico, Jamaica even. And they were each given one of my profiles, so whether it's Match.com or Yahoo Personals, whatever. And they couldn't say they were me. So they had to be like, this is Venkatesh writing on behalf of Tim Ferriss. But they were allowed to DM girls, and they had all the criteria, they had all the specs. I mean, it was very business-like. And their job was to compete to set coffee dates for me. So I had a weekend, because at first it was like I can do 4 to 5 on this day and 7 to 8:30 on this day, and it was too complicated. So I said, look, we're going to do a weekend, Saturday, Sunday, every day, all day. I just want you to pack this schedule full of coffee dates. That's it. And so I had 3 coffee shops on this main street in San Jose where I was living at the time. I just went from one coffee shop to the next, and back and forth, and back and forth, and back and forth. It's a little awkward when you have like one girl leaving and another one coming in, but that's why you have to alternate. But long story short is I met a great girl that way, and we ended up dating for about 6 months. I mean, it was definitely that was more successful than everything I had tried in San Jose, which is nicknamed Man Jose. It's more successful than everything I had tried in San Jose for, I guess, 2 years prior. And that included like going out to the bars and going out to the restaurants and like doing all that like long form stuff. And you know, I hate to say it, but it's like, you know, Venkatesh and all those guys did a better job in one weekend than all that. And it cost me about between 150 and 250 bucks. It's like less than two dinners, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you can definitely do it. You can definitely do it. But I would say that you strive for the 4-hour work week so that you can actually spend a proper amount of time choosing your mate. But yeah, you can certainly streamline it without a doubt.
I love it. Awesome. My last few questions are going to be talking about your book, and
Yeah,
you know, your new book, The 4 Hour Chef, is set for release on November 20th, correct?
yeah, that's right.
And aside from, you know, the obvious, how is this different from like your last books? And you know, what are some things that we can look forward to, and what are some things that you did differently in terms of the process of writing this book?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So this book, I have a couple of my friends who are reading and have read advanced copies, and a few of them said that this is their favorite of the three. So I'm super psyched. I mean, the book is very different than the past two books in many ways. Number one, it has more than 1,500 photographs. It has, I reached out to some interesting folks, so I have like Calvin and Hobbes cartoons, I have Victoria's Secret supermodels, I've got, you know, snipers, I have like everything in this. There's something for everybody, but it's really a choose your own adventure guide to learning. So anything, even if you don't care about cooking, that's fine. But the stories that I give are through trying to explore this skill I found very intimidating and very overwhelming and time consuming, which was cooking. So a few things I did differently in terms of process. So I used Evernote to do all my research and gather all my research. I used Sketch for screenshots. I used ScreenFlow for design feedback. I used Basecamp for organizing all my teams, and I'll come back to that. Then I used Dropbox for sharing all my big files with my teams. And we pulled out all the stops. I mean, this is Amazon Publishing's first major acquisition. It's their biggest book. And we had teams not only in New York, California, Los Angeles, Chicago. We had a couple of dozen photographers. We had illustrators all over the planet, like Singapore, Australia, you name it. And it's a monster. I mean, in a good way. But I'll leave it at that. I mean, what I would say is, you know, life is short. Even if you're, you know, 18, 19, it's time to get started, you know, accelerating and multiplying your learning potential. And that is the best way to squeeze the most out of every single hour you have, whether that's in your business life, your personal life, hobbies, whatever. Because I do think it's possible to become world-class in one or two things per year, not per lifetime. And I think I've done a pretty good job of demonstrating that not only, you know, can I do it, and it's because I figured out an approach to it, but my readers have been able to do it. That's the cool part, because I'll try all this crazy shit and be the human guinea pig, but then I'll say, all right, here's how I learned how to swim, and literally I have people who have like printed out a blog post, gone to the pool, never been able to swim, and leave being able to swim 20 laps. And that's the fun stuff. So I hope that every single person, you know, after reading it, and it's a choose your own adventure book, so like I don't expect anyone to read more than 50 to 100 pages at a time, but they will look at these skills that they've put off, or skills they've dreamed of acquiring, like playing the guitar, playing the violin, whatever, that they will, like, you know, go horns ahead and just charge right for it, because that's where the fun is.
Nice. I mean, I think that you mentioned your book is more so about the learning skills, as you mentioned here, as opposed to just a cookbook. And, you know, can you share some quick tidbits of what one of these skills are that are outlined in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk about, for instance, reversal, trying things backwards, right? And there are some really, and they're just simple questions, basically, that people can use to make faster progress. So, for instance, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Like, what if you built a fire backwards, right? So you start with the biggest logs on the bottom and then move up to the kindling at the top. It turns out that you can actually make a fire that burns like 2 or 3 times more effectively by building it upside down. What if in swimming you didn't kick at all, which is a reason a lot of people quit, right? They're like, hey, here's a kickboard, go do 5 laps, and it's exhausting, you don't move, and you give up. So what if you could do it without kicking at all? It turns out there's a method, total immersion swimming, that allows you to pretty much do that. You know, what if you could cook with no cleanup, 0 cleanup? Like, how would you engineer that? How would you make that happen? Turns out there are a lot of ways to do it. for instance, like you want to make the perfect steak. I'll just tell you right now. Like the way to make the perfect steak, here you go. Get a ribeye that's 1.5 inches thick. You're going to pat it dry. Put a ton of salt on the top. Leave it alone for about 1.5 hours. The water is going to come out of the steak, mix with the salt, and be reabsorbed. Okay. Then you wipe off any extra salt. Throw it in the freezer for 45 minutes. Okay. And elevate it if you can. The reason you put it in the freezer is to evaporate as much surface moisture as possible. That's the only reason. It's not to freeze the steak. It's to make the surface as dry as possible so you can get the best sear via something called the Maillard reaction. So then you take it out. You have the oven set to 200 degrees, really low. Get a skillet screaming hot. Put in some grapeseed oil or whatever. You can throw in some pepper flakes if you like into the oil, which is amazing. And then you sear that sucker. You take tongs, like 30, 60 seconds each side. And then what you're going to do, and this happens real quickly. Pick it up with tongs, put a bunch of like rosemary underneath. I mean, it could be a freaking sock. It doesn't really matter. What I mean is the rosemary serves two purposes. It flavors the steak, but it also keeps it from touching the metal so it doesn't overcook on that side. You get a probe thermometer. You already have this, right? I mean, this is in my gear section. Like, I tested thousands of types of gear, and I'm basically like, here's what you get if your budget's $50. Here's what you get if your budget's $250. You know, get a probe thermometer, it's $20. Stick it in the middle of the steak. Set an alarm for 135 degrees, and then you leave that thermometer in because the sort of display stays outside of the stove. And you throw it in at 200 degrees. 15 to 20 minutes later, you're done. Pull out the steak. Pour some of the juices on top of it, and you'll have the best steak you've ever had in your life. That is the perfect steak, and it's something that you can learn and get right every single time. You'll never have to worry if it's undercooked, overcooked. It'll be perfect every single time. And that's how recipes should work, whether it's for that, languages, or otherwise. So that's kind of what my goal was.
Oh, man. I want to try that tonight, actually.
Oh, and if you want to go nuts, if you really want to go nuts, is get some ghee, which is clarified butter. Right, so it's kind of like slow carb compliant. My diet, like slow carb compliant butter that doesn't burn like butter. So you can raise it. You can cook it at higher temperatures, and put that on top right when you get it out and let it melt on the steak. Oh, it's amazing.
Oh, man, sounds amazing. I might actually try that. I might replay this later.
Oh yeah, you should try it, man. You should totally try it. I've yet to make it for anyone, including a lot of like manly men who cook a lot of steaks in different ways, and they're just like, dude, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Awesome.
Definitely try it out.
Great. And then so let's see. Now the last question I have is, where's the best place people can pre-order your new book?
Yeah, the best place. So this book is fascinating because it's like I said, the first major book from Amazon Publishing. So it's being boycotted by Barnes & Noble and a lot of big retailers. So go to Amazon, and I really designed this book for print because you can open it up kind of like a comic book, and you get the spread, but it's also in digital. I mean, it's great in digital, but I think it's optimal in print. And I want to make, if I could, just one offer to folks because it's really a holiday book, and that is if you're interested in a 2-hour live Q&A with me, and I'll just grab some wine, you can ask me anything you want. Buy 3 print copies of the book, 1 for you and 2 gifts, and just email the Amazon receipt to 3books at 4hourchef.com. So the number 3 books at 4hourchef, the number 4, 4hourchef.com, and then you'll get an invite. So if you'd like to do a 2-hour live Q&A with me, ask me whatever you want after launch week, just get 3 print copies and send the email off.
Cool, awesome. We'll be sure to link that on the bottom and everything. All right, great.
Cool.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. So thanks a lot for joining us. I really appreciate your time.